Learning how to play your class is going to make everything you do in Guild Wars 2 so much easier. But it's hard to know where to start. So today I'm going to walk you through exactly how I learn a new class and show you just how quickly you can become an absolute powerhouse in Guild Wars 2. I've put countless hours into Guild Wars 2. I've spent the last 2 years making guides on YouTube and squirreled away hours learning build after build after build. So after all this time, I can say without a shadow of a doubt, a bit of time learning your class as early as possible is one of the best things you can do to get the most out of your Guild Wars 2 experience. Being better at playing and piloting your class is going to make everything you do in Guild Wars 2 easier. And good news, everyone, this learning process doesn't even have to take that long. Today we'll be focusing on practicing your PvE builds. It's also my area of expertise, so cool beans. With a bit of preparation, a can-do attitude, and me to walk you through the process, you will be mastering Guild Wars 2 in no time. To start off on the right foot, let's get you sorted with a good build. Making builds in Guild Wars 2 can be rather complicated. There are countless trait and utility skill combinations, not to mention the seemingly infinite armor, weapon, rune, and sigil setups you have access to. Fortunately, there are some insanely smart people in the community that have you covered. There's tons of great build resources out there, which I've linked in the description. They each cover different areas of the game, but no matter which build you pick up, at least you're off to a good start. For newer players, picking an already optimized build is going to save you a huge amount of time, effort, and heartache. Not to mention these builds have been thoroughly tested and have things like DPS benchmarks and DPS logs, which you can use to check your progress. No matter what build you pick, take the time, it doesn't necessarily have to be all at once, to read your skill and trait tooltips. Know what your skills and traits do, how they work together, and any other bonuses you need to be mindful of, and this will already put you miles ahead of where you would be otherwise. Now, Guild Wars 2 doesn't do the best job of telling you exactly how you're performing. If you're in a group of 10 people and the boss dies 20 seconds faster than it did last time, do you know how much better you did? There's no way for you to know just how much you've improved. That's where Arc DPS comes in. With Arc DPS, you can see your total damage per second along with a whole host of other useful information over the course of an entire fight. This add-on has been an absolute staple of the Guild Wars 2 endgame community for years, and I personally can't imagine my life without it. I won't go into detail here about how to get it set up, but you can check out my previous video where I walk you through step by step how to easily install and customize Arc DPS. This is completely optional, but I do highly recommend it. Now that you're all set up, let's introduce you to the best place in Guild Wars 2 to focus in and practice your class, the Special Forces training area. Here you can summon a golem to whack away at until your heart's content. And as you go along, you'll get a readout of your DPS in the game's chat window. You can apply boons to yourself, conditions to the golem, and even toggle on different levels of damage to practice your healing. For your convenience, you can also use your special action key to recharge all of your skills if you want to jump right back into practicing as quick as possible. Before we dive in, we need to get the golem set up correctly. If you want to compare your performance to the best players in the game, we need to set up similar conditions. Fortunately for us, if you want the exact same conditions that the wonderful people over at Snowcrows use when setting the highest possible DPS benchmarks, there's a guide just for that which I've included down in the description below. However, if you want a quick way to get started, simply do the following. Come over to the right console and grant yourself every single boon. There are some cases where classes get extra benefits based on the number of boons that they have, so granting all of these boons can slightly inflate the DPS numbers of these specific classes anyway. For most cases though, especially when you're practicing, simply do not worry about it. If we want to practice on the golem, we need to remove as many barriers as possible. Just give yourself every boon and move right on. The same applies to conditions on the golem as well, which you can apply on the left console over here. Having conditions on the golem, especially vulnerability, a 25% damage increase, really amps up your damage. So again, grant boons to yourself, apply conditions to the golem, summon a small hitbox 4 million HP golem. This is what most people tend to use, then you're good to go. Also, if you want to have the best time possible on the golem, make sure you use the food and utility that your build requires. Food and utility accounts for a huge portion of your stats, and you're leaving a couple of thousand DPS on the table if you leave home without it. One of the most common questions people have when they start practicing on the golem is, why is my damage so low? Quite often it turns out they didn't apply boons to themselves, conditions to the golem, and weren't using any food or utility. utility. Then instead of doing over 30k DPS, which they are more than capable of, they may be struggling to break 15k. Boons, conditions, food, and utility are important. Don't leave home without them. Now, how are you going to practice? First up, find a rotation guide. You can find these on websites like Snowcrow's, my YouTube channel. There are so many sources out there that will tell you what skills you should be using at any point. Have this rotation section open in another tab and keep on referring back to it. Focus on a small section of your rotation and practice it over and over again until you start to feel it becoming muscle memory. It will feel awkward at the start, but after a few minutes, it will become easier and easier. Use the special action key when in the training room to refresh your skills. Do this so you can practice the section you're focusing on with no downtime at all. Once you're comfortable, pick a new part of the rotation to focus on, or simply continue your rotation from where you got to before. Before you know it, you're going to be working your way through your full rotation. Focus on pressing the right buttons in the right order. As you get more comfortable, try and press your skills faster and faster. The point here is to try and get the correct rotation at least partially committed to muscle memory. So when you take your class to open world, raids, fractals, or strike missions, you'll at least have a good idea of what you're meant to be doing. You'll also be able to pick up very quickly if you do something wrong. This little bit of practice you've done now will make any mistakes stand out like a sore thumb. You don't need all that long smacking the golem at this stage. Personally, I may only spend about 30 minutes getting a good idea of the rotation and getting that muscle memory down pat. Now, give yourself a pat on the back. Simply doing this step is probably going to place you near the top of your random pub groups when it comes to DPS. Make a mental note of what your DPS was in the golem, then take your build, run some raids, strikes, fractals, or world bosses with it, and leave this poor soul behind you. Now, every enemy you encounter is a chance to practice your rotation. After a while, you're going to start feeling really comfortable with your class. You know the order that you need to press your skills, you know the timings, how they feel to press, and you've even started making tweaks for certain enemies to make things flow that little bit better. Now, after a few days, weeks, or even months, come back to the golem training room. Practice your rotation just like you did before, and watch as your DPS has magically increased. By getting a rough understanding of your rotation, blasting through some content, you're now well ahead of the curve. Double check the ideal order of your skills in whatever rotation guide you're looking at and see if any bad habits have crept in. You might have taken to pressing some utility skills at different points in your rotation or skipped certain skills entirely. Now is the best time to iron out those kinks. Again, you don't need to spend long here, just enough time to get a few rounds on the golem in. See how much your DPS has increased and correct a few bad habits. Do this every now and again and you'll easily find yourself at the top of the DPS charts. Now, for the eternal question, what exactly does it mean to be good? This has always been a bit of a moving target depending on how the overall balance in Guild Wars 2 is getting on, but let's pull some numbers to get started. Most of the top DPS builds in Guild Wars 2 have a benchmark number sitting somewhere in the realm of 40 to 45k DPS. If you're hitting numbers in this range, then congratulations. You are at the top of the pile in Guild Wars 2, and it's time to crack open your favorite beverage, put your feet up, and bask in your magnificence. From here on out, we're getting a nice big dose of my personal opinion, so buckle up. If you've got a DPS build and you're consistently pulling over 30k DPS on the golem, then for the vast majority of endgame content in Guild Wars 2, you're totally fine. You'll easily be clearing content, and people won't be side-eyeing you in raids or strikes. On the whole, if you join as a DPS player in a raid, and that's your level of performance, people will be happy. If you're below that though, then spending a bit of time smacking the golem is going to do you wonders. If you're on an offensive support build though, basically a DPS build that provides boons, think a Quickness Herald or an Alacrity Scourge, then I think if you can hit somewhere over 20k DPS while keeping up your key boons, then people will be happy with you. You're not going to be overly judged in terms of your DPS on these types of builds, but people really want to see high boon uptime for quickness and alacrity in particular. Endgame groups in Guild Wars 2 are fully built around having as close to 100% uptime of might, quickness, fury, and alacrity as possible. So if you can keep these boons up, or at least the boons that your build provides in particular, while doing over 20k DPS on a golem, you're golden. For healers, it's a bit different though. Benchmark I like to personally use is if you can out-heal the extreme damaging AoE on the golem while keeping all your boons up, that is a great starting point. A lot of being a healer in Guild Wars 2 is reacting to specific fight mechanics and being able to adapt your build to suit different encounters. But this is a great start though. Another way I like to think about DPS numbers is in terms of percentages of the benchmark numbers. If you have a build set up correctly and you hit your damaging skills off cooldown reasonably quickly, that should get you about 70% of the benchmark. Pressing your skills in the correct order at a reasonable pace, i.e. doing the correct rotation, should get you to 80%. Performing the rotation correctly while pressing your buttons as quick as possible with minimal downtime will get you to around 90% of the benchmark. Personally for me, I consider this to be the point where I know a rotation. 95% of the benchmark means you've now basically mastered the rotation, and then there are only a very few specific trips for the golem in particular, or bits of RNG you need to push your number that little bit higher. 100%, again, you are the benchmark. These are just some rules of thumb I use to gauge my progression as I practice on the golem, either for our build guides or any other build that I feel like playing. Practicing, like I've worked through earlier with you, means that I'll hit 80% of the benchmark, usually within a few spawns of the golem. It might be an hour or two of practice before I hit 90%, and then honestly a lot more hours. A bit less if I'm practicing a build I'm already familiar with to hit 95% or above. However, like I mentioned before, if you can hit 80% of a benchmark, then that will get you above 30k DPS, and most groups you join will be totally happy with you, and you should be as well. And that, my friends, is exactly how you can practice your build in Guild Wars 2. And I guarantee if you follow this process, make sure to enjoy yourself along the way. Then you will be blasting your way to the top of the DPS charts and blitzing through all of the wonderful content Guild Wars 2 has to offer in no time. Let me know in the comments below if you have any more questions about how to practice your class, or what is your favorite way to practice your class in Guild Wars 2. Once again, if you want another leg up in terms of practicing and getting better at Guild Wars 2, check out my guide on how to install and customize Arc DPS, one of the best add-ons out there for Guild Wars 2. And with that, I'll catch you all next time. Cheers.